Welcome, everyone, to Coffee with a Codex. My name is Dot Porter, and I am a curator here in the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies in the University of Pennsylvania Library's Kislak Center for Special Collections, Rare Books and Manuscripts. And the Schoenberg Institute is a research and development institute focused on manuscripts. We do a lot of digitization. All of our manuscripts are digitized. So if you go to the record here, that's the manuscript we're looking at today. You should be able to follow links to get access to the digital copy, which is on a system called Calenda. But it's very different to see it sort of even in a video, even when it's not in front of you on a desk. And this is what we do for Coffee with a Codex. I like to bring out books and show them to you to give you a sense of them as objects and just how very neat they are. So if you have not been here before, welcome to Coffee with a Codex. It's very informal. If you have questions or anything you want to say as I go, please type them in the chat and I will keep my eye on it. And if you are back, if you've been here before, welcome. It's always great to see people coming back. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So this manuscript, the shelf mark is MS Codex 760, and it is a 15th century Italian translation of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. I'll say a little bit more about the circumstances of its writing and the text in a second, but first let's take a look at this. I just think this is such a pretty book. I think cover is probably the first thing that I noticed. So the binding is what we call contemporary, which means it's a 15th century binding, but the person who did the cataloging wasn't comfortable saying it was the original binding. So it could be, the difference being the original binding is the binding that it was put in when it was made, right? And those are very cool. We have a couple manuscripts with original bindings, but it's definitely contemporary. So it's in that 15th century Italian style. I'm moving it around so you can sort of see the light playing on the leather. It's got this nice stamped decoration, really a lot, sort of layers and layers of these stamps in the leather. The leather is over wooden boards, so you can I probably shouldn't do that too hard, but it's wooden, so it's a little heavy, like that makes it a little heavier, and it's got metal. These are called bosses, so metal bosses that are kind of to keep the leather from wearing when you put it on a table. So instead of the leather hitting the tabletop, these metal things hold it up. So that's one of the reasons why the leather is actually in pretty good condition, except it's got a little hole. And there's these little round holes. Those are going to be from bookworms. So these are larvae that have sort of chewed through. If we look at the spine has sort of come away a little bit, so you can see some of the stitching that's happening under there, which is kind of neat. There is a label that is written later. Wonder if the record says anything about that label. Let's take a look. Binding. I'm not seeing anything there, but that's kind of neat. So, and then the back is just very similar to the front. So 15th century Italian contemporary binding. Open it up and we can see on the inside here more of these little holes. So this is where the bookworms have kind of chewed through, and they've come and also not only have they chewed through the leather and then the wood, but they've also come through the parchment, which is the paste down here. So Martha's asking about the numbers on the cover. Oh, I do see there's something written here. It looks like PC59. So that is not 15th century. I am guessing that, are you saying AC 69, something like that? I'm guessing that this is a number that was written by a previous owner of the whatever they had as the shelf, for their own shelf number. So MS Codex 760 is our shelf mark. That's how we find it on the shelf. But other people who owned it would have had different ones. Notably, I'm gonna see. Here we go. So this Phillips MS 239. This is Sir Thomas Phillips. We have several manuscripts in our collections that were owned by Sir Thomas Phillips, and he often had, I don't know if this is him or his librarian, somebody wrote this out, and so that's interesting to see. Sir Thomas Phillips was an English collector in the 19th century. At one point, it's estimated that he owned 60,000 manuscripts and something like 90,000 printed books. Like his house was like completely full of books. And when he died, they were dispersed. So they went everywhere. So we have over 200 items that were from the Phillips collection. They're in the British Library, they're in the Bodleian, all the libraries have Phillips manuscripts, but it's always kind of fun to see. Becky says she's in the UK and went to school in Compton near Wolverhampton. And here is from the Library of Lawrence W. Hodson of Compton Hall near Wolverhampton. So that's neat. So it was really common for people who owned these books to like put their stamps in. And as they were bought and sold, you get multiple signs here. So we also have the Library of George Dunn near Maidenhead. All of these other notes are going to be from people. And then this is, people who owned the book. And then here we have another thing that we see is when a book is sold and the person who bought it will take the description from a catalog and sort of paste them in there. So there's a lot happening here. Let's see. Kai, I'm used to seeing older manuscripts handled by white gloves. Do you not have to do that? That must be so neat to feel the old parchment with your bare hands. Yes. The white gloves, we call it the white gloves thing. Clean, dry hands is best practice for handling manuscripts and printed books. There are materials that you should wear gloves for. The manuscript we look at next week is going to be a glove manuscript. Photographs, anything with metal. So technically, when I'm like poking the metal on, I shouldn't be touching that because your fingers can actually damage those. But parchment, as long as your hands are clean and dry, it's not going to hurt them. And in fact, when you're wearing gloves, it makes it hard to feel. And so sometimes you handle books more with more violence than you should. So that's why I'm not wearing gloves, but thank you for the question. Okay, so here's where the text starts, and I'm going to, let's see, I'm actually going to do something first. I'm not going to start here. I'm going to turn a couple pages here, and this is a single sheet that's been folded and it's sort of sewn down the middle. So here's this, and then when I turn the page, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can take a look at what's happening here. Two things that I notice immediately that you have probably also noticed. One is that these pages look different. The writing looks different. Even the parchment looks different. This is it's a different side, I think, of the parchment. So this is the parchment. If you don't know, it's made of animal skin. So it's treated animal skin. So it has the inside, which we call the flesh side, and then the hair side, which is the outside. So this is my hair side, right, because it's got hair on there. This is the hair side. I can tell it's the hair side because it has hair follicles here. That's what that sort of patterning is. This is a flesh side. It is sort of creamy colored and it's smooth. So the other thing that I noticed immediately is that there's little holes on this parchment, little round holes, and there isn't on this side. And why that's interesting is because if you remember, we'll turn back here, and there are lots of holes here from the bookworms that came through. So what this tells us is that these two leaves here are, I think they're replacements. That is, there were 2 leaves when the book was made that were here that probably got chewed through, that had holes in them. And for some reason that we don't know, maybe they just fell out, they were replaced by this at some later point. The record doesn't say about when. I'm not really sure when. I don't think it was that much later. But it's definitely a different hand and a little bit later. And here's the flesh side of this parchment. So you can see it looks more like the flesh side here. The reason that I pointed out in this opening is that the way these books are made, the way the sheets are laid out, is you always, except when you don't, right, which there's a couple of times, you have hair facing hair and flesh facing flesh. So when you're turning through a book and you suddenly see hair facing flesh, you know that something is up. And also the holes also give that away. So the first thing that we have is the translator's introduction, or I'm not sure is the introduction they use the word that they use. Yes, the introduction, and then there's a dedication. So Leonardo Bruni Aretino is the translator. So he was born in circa 1370s, so sort of late in the latter half, I guess, of the 14th century, and he died in 1444. So remember, this is a 15th century book. So this, depending on when in the 15th century it was written, it could have been within his lifetime. He was an Italian humanist, a historian, a statesman. He was the Chancellor of Florence and also the apostolic secretary to 4 popes between 1405 and 1414. So he was doing a lot. He was an important person in Italy at this time. He wrote his own works. He was primarily a historian, so he wrote historical books, but he also translated from Greek into Latin. So there would already have been Latin translations of Aristotle in existence at this time. Aristotle was very popular from about the 12th century onward, and there was a practice of sort of integrating almost the Aristotelian work into the Catholic Church. So it was very much sort of part of the church. And so the fact that Leonardo is making new translations in the 15th century, now we're like Renaissance, right? Like we're reacting against the medieval, and we're saying we're going back to classics. So we're making new translations. And in fact, he made translations of multiple texts from Aristotle, and they were really popular. His translation of Nicomachean Ethics was widely distributed in both manuscript and print. So this is a sort of maybe an earlier copy because it is 14th century, but this would have been copied from the 15th century, from the 15th century up till the 17th century. So that is sort of the context that we're in. So I'll start pulling through here. It's got these beautiful, I forgot about this. I didn't have to, because I had this event that I had to attend in the time before this when I usually prepare, so I haven't looked at this in a while, but these are lovely. Let's see, we have a couple of questions. Those bookworms were very hungry. There were. I think at some point, it'll be fun to see at what point the bookworms stop moving through, because from what I've seen, they don't actually like parchment that much. So they will at some point stop, whereas with paper, they'll just keep going. And this is parchment. Tina asks, do you know about about where it was created, calligrapher/monks who wrote this manuscript, humanist hand? Yeah, so it is, let me take a quick look at the record. It is a humanist script. Don't really know about who exactly wrote it. Probably not a monk. It was probably written in a scriptorium, but that is a non-monastic scriptorium. but I'm not really sure. I don't think we know exactly. But I think it would have been a secular scriptorium as opposed to a monastic one. So I'm going to see if we can get a little of the gold, because there is that nice gold there. And the blue, Martha says beautifully gilded letters. Yeah, they are. They are really lovely. So the Nicomachean Ethics is the text. It has 10 chapters, and it is, I didn't actually know much about Aristotle, so this was interesting. It's about ethics, practical ethics as opposed to theoretical ethics, and that is how to live well. The science of the good for human life. So things to do to live a good and, I suppose, productive life. So it was really, as I said, it was popular in the Middle Ages. I think at some point after it was written in Aristotle's own time, it lost its popularity. I think I remember reading the Stoics kind of came later, and then everybody was Stoics. But in the Middle Ages, it was back to being more popular. And the title, the Nicomachean Ethics, is assumed to be a reference to Aristotle's son, who was called Nicomachus, and who died early, whatever that, I don't know how old exactly he was. I don't know that much about Aristotle. But there we go. So we are in book 1, and I couldn't really find headings for the chapters in terms of like what the different chapters are, but we'll see if we can find all of them. So we're in chapter 1. I'm going back because Margaret asks, what's the note on the prior page to the left? It didn't look like it was included in the text. No, this is the note I think you're talking about. So this is a note that was added later, and I'm trying to see. Sometimes there would be like, what I'm looking for is if there's some kind of notation to show me if something in here is being replaced. Text is being replaced. What I do see now that I'm looking in, this is sort of fun. If you see here, this says bonum, and then it says BONU with the line over it, which is also bonum. The line over the U is indicating an abbreviation, so that's also bonum. But then if you look, there's little dots underneath the second bonum, and that's saying erase that. That was a way of erasing without physically erasing it. It's called underdotting, and it's a pretty common thing. But I don't see. Because I can't really see what that says. If it's a comment, it could be a comment on something happening here. Yeah. But it also looks similar to, well, no, I don't think so. I don't know. But yes, it's in a later hand, so that's a later one. O Carolyn, in the line above, Felicitas Agibulum is the note referring to that. It could be, yeah, because it does sort of look like it could be that. But what I want is for there to be some kind of notation that pulls the two of them together, and I'm not seeing one, which is annoying me. Oh, and Martha says about Nicomachean Ethics, it's Aristotle's virtue ethics text. It is a great book. All right, so let's keep going. Let's see if we can find at least more. And as I thought, there are fewer and fewer little holes. There's still some here. They're hard to see, I think, but there's one there, but there's just a couple, and then there's one down here. So they're giving up. The worms are giving up. Okay, so here is another one of these beautiful little initials. There. they're very nice. And the blue, it's a blue, dark blue. That's nice. One thing you can sort of see here, which I like, is that the blue ink up in the corner covers part of the V or the U there, if you can see it. And I think it also covers the T at the start of the second line. And the reason that I like that is because it's reminding me that the book was made through a process. It was made in layers. So what would have happened is the parchment would have been prepared, and I'm actually going to say more about that in a second because I just noticed something on the page that I'm going to show you. And then probably the scribe would have written a little, this is a C, there'd be a little C written in a blank space. The person who wrote all of the text would have left a blank space and a little C. And an artist would come later and see the C and then make an illuminated C, which is what we see here. And so in the process, some of the paint covered up the writing that was there before. And so we've got these sorts of layers happening. Now, thinking about the preparation of the paper, the text is very straight. It's written straight because there are, I can't even see it anymore, but there would have been lines probably made with some kind of an instrument that would make an inscription in the page, but not like a pencil. It wouldn't leave a mark other than that. And the way that one of the ways to make these straight lines is through the use of prick marks, which is making little dots down the side of the page or of the sheet. So you think about the whole sheet, and then you have one set of prick marks, these little holes on one side of the sheet and another set on the other side, and then you draw lines between them. And that's how you make the lines. And often the prick marks are trimmed off. And these have not been trimmed off. These, you can still see the prick marks right here on the edge. So that's kind of fun. Oh, Lisa, it looks like the C for the illuminator is in the right margin. You are totally right. So we got to look for them now. That feels unusual. Like I feel like usually they put it right here, but maybe they put it over here this time. Let's see. Femida, are the bookworms entering and then leaving the way they entered? What is happening? You know what? I never thought about that. I guess they must, because if otherwise they die, I don't think they're going in and dying. I would think that they would, yeah. But I don't know if there's anyone who knows better. I never ever thought about that. What happens to the bookworms when they stop eating? I'm going to assume that they're leaving until somebody tells me otherwise. So Martha asks about C as a signature mark, which would be a notation about the quire. That is the booklets of parchment that are sewn together to make the book, which are often also numbered. But no, it's not a signature mark. Here's another. Now I'm going to be noticing these things. So here's a little note. It looks like it's NO with a little line over it, which I think is non. But I can't see what it might be, except there is a non here in the text. So I'm not sure what that's about, but there are a few. So there's like a few notes. Sometimes we have manuscripts, especially manuscripts with great big, these are like big inviting margins. And it makes me think that you could, go in and leave a lot of notes, and yet there aren't a lot of notes. And actually, Mikhail says nota. Okay, so that's nota here. And Kristen is asking, why did the reader leave so much space to the right and below the text? Why not fill the page more? So this is sort of what I was getting to. And it's a great It's a great question. There's a few different answers. I'm going to give them to you, but I'm going to look at a couple things too, because I've just noticed there's more notes, and we've got one of these. Uh-oh. Oh, don't do that to me. Come on. There we go. There we go. We have a manicule, which is a little, it's a literal pointer where a reader has come in and sort of pointed out something that's interesting to them. And they're often drawn to look like little hands, which is fun. And then up here, we have a note, and that says Plato. And Plato inquit. So we have, again, I think it may be that whoever this is sort of coming through and maybe marking in a similar, instead of using a pointer, they're leaving little word notes out there. So here's another nota there, and more little notes. Okay, so back to Kristen's question about the margins. Ooh, and another more. So keep your eyes out. So sometimes, there's a couple of different reasons why there might be very large margins. One reason to have large margins is because you, as Jenna says, room for illumination. So that it could be that there was going to be more illumination put in, and it just never happened. I think that's, that's possible, especially since the initials are so nice. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is that whoever made it thought that there would be a lot that people would come through later and add notes. So sometimes I'll see manuscripts that usually they're not as beautiful as, oh, stop doing that. Sorry about that. That they're usually not this pretty. They're more like a like a workbook. And they have big margins, and then they're full of notes from people who've been, coming in and over and over and over again. So that's another reason. Another reason to have big margins is to show that the book is expensive or that you can afford it. So this book is made of parchment. It's a 15th century book made of parchment. By the 15th century, at least by the mid-15th century, when there were printing presses, there was more paper. I mean, there's paper before, but the printing press, because you were able to make many more books more cheaply, it's only more cheaply if the material is less expensive. So here's another one. So having paper would be less expensive. Parchment, the fact that this is made of parchment means it's a more expensive book. It has illumination, not a lot, but there's some. And they are not, as you pointed out, like there's huge margins that they're not filling in. So this would have been an expensive book, even without a lot of illumination in the margins. And it's Italian, and Italian at this time does tend to be sort of a little more subtle in its decoration. So I wouldn't expect this. It's not like a French book of hours where it's going to be like full of things. Usually you're going to have maybe one page at the beginning that has a lot of illumination, and then not so much in sort of 15th century Italy. I'm hearing people leaving, which makes me sad, but then I look and I see it is 12:30. So let me see if I can get to one more. And there's more notes, not lots and lots of them, but there's more. Let's look at one more illumination before we go. Here we go. So one more, zoom in on it. And who are making these notes? It is so hard to say who's making the notes. Whoever was reading the text after it was written, whoever owned it and was reading it. Maybe students, although students tend to make a lot more notes. But I'm afraid I can't give you much more context than that. But it is time to end. Thank you all so much. I hope you'll come next week, because next week that book we're going to be looking at is really interesting. And so this was really fun. Have a great week, and hope I'll see you soon.